Hello, I'm back. This is your host, Alexandra Loves, aka Aya Iwo, and I'm here for a moment to introduce to you a mini-series podcast I just released called Afro Storybook, Collective Wisdom and Revelations from Africa and Her Diaspora. Friends, this offering was 2 years in the making, and I am so proud of it. If you love the Woke Wisdom podcast, you will love the Afro Storybook. In this series, we take a transformative journey of discovery, connection, and self-reflection. We discuss the rich tapestry of African identity, share our experiences, our challenges, and our triumphs. We explore the depths of our connected identity, celebrating the vibrant cultures that unite us across the world. I'm dropping the first episode here in the Woke Wisdom podcast feed, and if you'd like to hear the rest, you can find the link for all 7 parts of the Afro Storybook in the show notes. Thank you for being a listener here with us, and enjoy part 1 of the Afro Storybook called Welcome, Family. Hello and welcome. My name is Alexandra Loves, Aya Iwo, and I'm your host. It's my pleasure to present Afro Storybook, Collective Wisdom and Revelations from Africa and Her Diaspora. This is a project of the Woke Wisdom podcast. I created this storybook to be an affirmation that the children of Africa, the diaspora, are connected as a family across all of the water and lands of this earth. And though there are many differences between us, we are unified in more ways than we might be aware of. And though this storybook is for anyone who connects, I did have in mind those who are here in the States who are seeking to know themselves better. In 2022 and 23, I set out to interview and chat with 9 people from Africa, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, and South America. All of them are either African or consciously identify with being part of the African diaspora. All of my guests are our Afro-ethnic family. We will be hearing stories and wisdom from elders, youngers, and in between, farmers, artists, teachers, student activists, and more. As we continue through the different parts of the 7-part storybook, I'll introduce each speaker. But if you want to meet them all now, head over to the Woke Wisdom Podcast website. The address is in the show notes. So the story starts with me. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia in an international community where I interacted with many dynamic cultures and identities. My family is Creole from New Orleans, and we were blessed to travel extensively, immersing in culture around the world. My first exposure to living long-term in the United States was attending boarding school for part of high school, and it was rough. I started to find out about race and how important it was to everyone here immediately. I was told relentlessly by teachers and people of all colors that I was Black and not to forget it for various reasons. And I was like, okay, so why is this so important and what does it mean to them? And I truly did not get it. One of the people I interviewed spoke about her similar journey in arriving to the UK. Rachel Bashabe is a fashion designer from Uganda living in London.
I would say it's when I moved here that I felt it and I started to see it. And in a sense of, I remember making the joke to my principal for the college I went to. When I went the first day, and I was like, everyone's really tall and very light and it speaks so fast. Like, yeah, you're very tiny. And I'm 5'2.5". I don't think I was 5'2.5" then. I was probably 5 foot. And I was just like, everything looks so different. And then because of our education in Uganda, it's very much you must perform at the very best. And if you were a girl child, they encouraged you to, if you were good and intelligent with science, they stick to that. So they push you. So I used to be a science holder, did physics, did maths, all of that. So when I got here, it then was apparent in college that I was very, very intelligent. And that kind of made people start picking on me, especially calling me like, oh, you're the Black person who thinks you just came from Africa and you're very bright or whatever. But obviously later on I managed to navigate and I became like, not the teacher's pet or the favorite, but people really understood that she is who she is. I never conformed to the bullying or like telling me you need to act a certain way because obviously you're black. Because there was a lot of emphasis on you're black. You need to stick with the black people or you need to do things the black way. And I'm like, but I wasn't raised like that. I was raised in a country where even though I went to some really, really wealthy international schools, it was all unity. Again, it comes back to the community sense. We never felt like you're this, you're that. It's when I moved here and then it's like, oh, I need to actually identify. Even the question of what's your nationality? Like when you have to tick the boxes here and it's like black, British, African, black. And I'm like, all I know is Ugandan. Black, that's it. So yeah, and even not just like race in a sense of black or white, race in a sense of even like Africans, the different demographics. I will say that I started to learn that when I moved to this country, because when I was growing up, we learned South African and East African history predominantly. We did hear about West Africa, but it was when I moved here that I started seeing West Africans, making friends with them. And I was like, oh, wow, there's even a divide in that sense. So yeah, it was more moving here that I had to start thinking of the question of race and where do you sit? But then again, do you really need to sit in it? So these are questions I keep asking myself as I grow. Because you don't have it when, even for example, when you traveled. So like when I traveled to Uganda, we don't have direct flights yet. You go through either the flight I like to take is through Nairobi or through Dubai. And when you get to Nairobi, sometimes they do give you this landing thing for transferring. And it never, you just ask East African community or rest of the world. But when you're here, it's always a box you have to take, whether you've gone to the hospital, whether you're filling out a credit card. I'm like, why the emphasis on understanding? It's not just, okay, it's black. There's demarcations on what type of black you are, what section of black is it the Caribbean, is it the African black? And if it's African, what part? And it's like, why are you splitting so much? And that's how I feel, because it's like, you're making me keep going in and out of who I am. And it's one of those things that I even now just have to be prompted when I'm asked, what are you? I'm just like, Ugandan. Then like, okay, but Ugandan, but what do you, I'm like, oh, okay, British, okay. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is just too much for me.
I can understand that feeling. I noticed here that in the States, race was the first and most important identifier. People were harshly judged, punished, or rewarded by community and society based on their race. And it seemed that the race identities were a very dense box that was created to keep people locked in. It seemed that I had no choice but to live in a race box assigned to me if I wanted to get along or be accepted. It was limiting and bizarre to me. And I went back and forth trying to comply with living in my box and breaking out just to be myself. And it was exhausting for many years. Mike Crenshaw, an artist, educator, activist from Chicago, Illinois, living here in Portland, Oregon, talks about his internal and external experiences of a similar struggle.
Yeah, I have a deep racial awareness, and I think my racial awareness comes from looking at race critically because it wasn't easy for me to identify at times in my life. So the early childhood, the things I talked about, and even into my adolescent years, preteen, adolescent, all through there were questions about, because of the forced binary of black and white and racial identity in this country that we're indoctrinated with from the very beginning, there was a lot of, you're not black enough, you don't talk like you're black, you talk like white boys, which came from living in white environments for periods and trying to assimilate and even not even being aware that I was changing the way I talk to get along better socially with white kids. You know, growing up in Chicago, you turn on, all we listened to was black music. But then when we move outside of Chicago, some of these other communities in Illinois and up in Minnesota, you couldn't get black music on the radio really, unless it was the most popular music. And then so I learned to listen to rock and learn to enjoy rock music. And then I come back to the hood and they'd be like, oh, you listening to that white boy music? You know, kicking it with the white kids, I learned to like BMX and skateboarding, you know, coming back to the hood. They'd be like, oh, that's you riding them white boy bikes. So you like what the white boys do. And so there was a lot of forced binary of like, this is good and this is bad, depending on the container that I was in, because when I was with the white kids, there was a lot of the racist shit. Like they weren't as mean and critical of how I talked, but it was the stupid questions about asking about the stereotypical aspects of Black reality that they had only heard about from their parents, who are often racist in what they were telling their children, or that they'd seen on TV or consumed in the media or movies. And so after navigating all of those different things, it became apparent that no matter how I saw myself, other people saw me the way that they chose to see me. And it was only through that fire that I began to grow weary, tired, sad, ultimately enraged, and eventually empowered and going, I'm going to see myself the way I want to see myself. And fuck all y'all. And that's been important for me to have self-determination in terms of racial consciousness. For me to see the commonalities between myself and other people who identify as I do, to see the cultural and ethnic characteristics that are common amongst us, locally, regionally, nationally, universally. And then to understand and respect the nuances and the differences that we have that are part of who we are individually within those same platforms, right? And a lot of it is constructs, and some of it is in our blood and deeper than that. And ultimately, at some point, it becomes politicized in our awareness and in our survival. And ultimately, it becomes a spiritual thing because we're trying to figure out who we are and how to be who we are beyond what we've been told about ourselves.
And I must acknowledge that this is a very personal experience, and my observations of this country and the perceptions of race was so foreign to me. Remember, I had never truly lived in the States before I was 14. I don't condemn any part of the population that is aligned with Black identity. People feel power and pride there. I think of community support organizations like Black Panthers or concepts like Black Girl Magic. Where would we be without things like that? The power of a group that creates pride and the liberation for individuals that inspires them to be unapologetically themselves and rise up, that connects us and it heals us, especially for a group that's marginalized, misunderstood, and underrepresented. Still, I needed to go on a journey engaging with identity, and that journey included a lot of confusion and crisis when it came to race. I sought out my brothers and sisters all over the world. I listened to their stories. I interviewed people. And here's something I found really interesting. I found that there is more knowledge and celebration of African identity in populations with people from the Caribbean, parts of South America, Europe, or even first and second generation Americans with parents from Africa. That connection with Africa is still alive. They know where they come from. At the same time, I found a general absence of this awareness of African identity with those who are from and live here in the U.S. Why is there such an absence of this awareness in the United States? I know that we can learn from our family around the world about who we are. I've seen it. So I started to look at how our society does not honor who we are as human beings and how institutions benefit from us identifying in specific assigned ways. And I uncovered a lot of omitted history. And I unlearned a lot of lies I was taught in high school, especially about who we are as African diasporic people. Eventually, this journey led me into a deeper understanding of myself ethnically, and with that comes culture, and also spiritually, which is ultimately the core of who I am. And after seeking for the connections and wisdom outside of myself and finding my family around the world, when it was time to reflect inwardly and ask myself, who am I really and where do I belong and where do I come from? I came to a place of clarity within my own identity. Very clearly, I am a child of Africa. And though Blackness is part of my story, that identity barely seems to scratch the surface of who I am. So part of my work became to share and teach about identity and discovering who we really are and how we're connected to others. These personal evolutions and revelations inspired me to go on a couple of pilgrimages to West Africa. It influenced my guidance work and my podcast and ultimately this storybook you're listening to right now. I like what Andrea Sugar Black Encinas has to say about us as a people. She's an arts manager, singer, voice coach, and as she says, a small-time farmer in Trinidad.
So I think, so in a sense of ethnically, that's a little bit something separate to how I might identify myself in terms of what I want to embrace and take forward. I have a poem that I wrote called The Dilemma of Cosmopolitanity that explores that very topic in terms of the difference between the color of your skin, but the breadth of your mind. You know, so what people see you as singular, you know, they see the color of your skin and you put in a box. But the plurality of who I am is so much, you know, more varied and complex, and I like to embrace all of it.
Yes, we are far more varied and complex than what can fit into a neat, compliant identity box. I wanted to share all of this wisdom from your family with you because I found that the more I embrace this greater part of my identity, how I see the world, the opportunities I can perceive, and the healing that has taken place is transformational. The next speaker is Elaine. He and I were talking about music and food, and he shared a profound piece of wisdom that encapsulates this experience of the identity journey so well. Elaine Fusion Clapham is a transformative storyteller from the Philippines, St. Vincent, and living in London.
I always struggled to find a definition of my ethnicity because people tend to project onto you who you are. So growing up in an area called Tottenham in North London, is very much a big Caribbean community. So coming out of my front door, I'm embraced as a Black man of Caribbean roots. That means sound system, that means reggae, that means patties, that means soul music, that means rare groove. But come inside my house and you'll meet a Filipino mum, and I'm living inside a Southeast Asian world where there's spring rolls, there's adobo chicken, there's a deep love of Christianity, there's a generosity of spirit, which I think runs through the people from the Philippines. And I had identified as being Filipino as well. There isn't a box to tick that says Black, West Indian, taken from Africa, also Filipino, feeling British. And then I found a song, and the lyric for the title was Ordinary Man, Afro-Filipino, average sort of guy. And I was like, okay, I'm Afro-Filipino. I found it. So that's how I identify now. I don't tick any other boxes. I go straight to other. I've got Afro-Filipino. You ask the question, you figure it out.
Oh, that sounds so liberating.
100%. Cornel West said it in one of his introductions for KRS-One, where he said, you know, academics are forced, quote unquote, to ask important questions. They ask about, are Black people as intelligent as white people? Are women as capable as men? But they never ask, are people with blue eyes smarter than people with green eyes? So it's like, who's actually positing the questions? Who made the boxes? We want to break boxes that we don't make because they're not boxes that we recognize to house us. So there's even a hierarchy of boxes where it begins with a particular race, a particular group, and then it descends down a scale and you end up at other. So there's all kind of ways of lacking agency, which is why we had our conversation before about mandatory boxes that we have to tick in order to progress through a form, and the capacity for the individual to opt out being labeled by others, and perhaps have an opportunity to label ourselves if we choose to. It's funny because people now more than ever recognize themselves to be anything from another gender to another species, Vulcan, Klingon, tree, you know, and we're still trying to be some kind of Black that feels right.
My intention is to help you remember that you are so much more than you think, and you have family around the world that can support that. And I thought the best way to do that is to provide connection in our joy, our struggles, and everything we experience. Now you know a little bit about my story and have met a few of the people I chatted with, and you'll hear more from them again later. In this part, we touched a little on the challenges of identity, mainly because it was a large part of the story of how I got here to present this to you. There's so much more in this storybook. We'll continue on with identity and talk about culture, race, and ethnicity.
Well, in my family, there has been like a lot of multiracial communities and identities. So for me, by my dad's family side, I have indigenous roots.
There are some things that we do as Kambas that the other tribes like the Luya people don't like doing them. There is types of food we like eating, we as Kambas. You find that a certain tribe in somewhere doesn't like those types of food as we Kambas like. Yes. I don't think whether there is discrimination in race in Kenya.
Relationships, family, community.
The family, when I came here, I have a lot of children.
I love the fact that I have a very big extent. It's like a proper classical African traditional family. It's huge, it's wide, it's so many cousins that half the time you don't remember.
She was one of the only true Christians I've seen in that she served, and that was her purpose. But she didn't judge people. She didn't tell people they needed to change their lives or be different. And she worked among the most downtrodden and was at home amongst them.
Self-expression, ancestry, religion, spiritual practice.
They are connected to their culture and they are connected to the religion they have as Catholic. You know, they never left their culture.
I just feel like as an adult, it's not do or don't, because I have choice. And with me, spirituality tells you there's a higher power and you can believe and do certain things, and you're learning, you're constantly evolving, and that power knew that you have choice to constantly evolve. So I find more peace and calm by not even calling myself religious.
Music, food, land.
Oh my God, you wanna make me hungry now.
God, I explained to you the complexity of our ethnicities, right? So I could not tell you one dish that is Trinidadian, because our curry, our Trinidad curry, is not the same curry that you'll find in India. It is Trinidad curry.
Now I can say I love Afrobeats. Afrobeats.
Fast forward to now, Afrobeats, African culture, jollof rice, they're on things. The wheels turn.
High life, Afrobeat, we call it Afrobeat. Well, Calypso is socio-political with a different music, a different style of music underneath it.
And to see the wilderness. And so I fell in love with mountains and wild landscapes.
The challenges we face.
I'm not just one girl that have every privilege as people from the upper class.
It seems like we are forgetting what is love. We are forgetting what is respect. Children doesn't respect anymore.
I think one of the big challenges is maintaining the optimism that I've always taken for granted.
And also the inspirations, hopes, and dreams that we're creating to make a better world.
I'm inspired of being. I usually have a passion of being a political leader in Kenya.
Because I know if we have the abundance, we'll be able to move to other states. We'll be able to help as many as possible. So that is the only thing that's inspiring. I don't sleep. I'm always thinking about it.
And throughout all 7 parts of this storybook, we'll continue to talk about our African roots and our connection. I felt blessed to chat with these 9 who were generous in sharing their experiences and stories. I know you'll be inspired, and I hope that the Afro Storybook helps you remember that you are a child of Africa with family you're connected to all over the world. Enjoy this 7-part series, the Afro Storybook, Collective Wisdom and Revelations from Africa and her Diaspora. Afro Storybook, Collective Wisdom and Revelations from Africa and her Diaspora. I'm your host, producer, and editor, Alexandra Loves, Aya Iwo Riosa. You can find me at themoongardentemple.com or on IG at Tranquil Badassery. This is a production of the Moon Garden Temple and the Woke Wisdom Podcast. Please go to www.wokewisdompodcast.com or on IG, Woke Wisdom Podcast, to learn more about the storybook and my guests. My guests are Elaine Fusion Clapham, Judy Kalunga Kwavoile, Mike Crenshaw, Bailin Ramirez, Jibori Abla Yvette, Chekamala Diabate, Rachel Bashabe, Andrea Sugar Black Encinas, and Olutosin Oladoshu Adeboale. Special thanks to the Portland Regional Arts Council for the initial funding of this project. And also, special thanks to 7 Vision Studios for technical help and Quincy Davis for sharing his original compositions for the theme music and soundscaping for this storybook. Please consider supporting this project and future audio projects by subscribing to Woke Wisdom Podcast on Patreon. Thank you for listening and be blessed.